My parents gave my sister a luxury resort trip for Christmas. Mom smiled. You are the pride of our family. I opened my gift, a paper labeled household chore list. Dad laughed. Now you can be more useful. My sister clapped. I packed my bags and left. Days later, my parents called in a panic. Where are you? Come back. Margaret Watson gazed at the winter sunlight streaming through the window while rereading the message from her mother on her smartphone. I have a special surprise for you. Look forward to it, the message said, bringing a faint smile to her face. Margaret's daily life working at an accounting firm in the small town of Willow Creek, Pennsylvania, was filled with numbers and routine. Her work understanding clients' financial situations in detail and providing accurate advice was highly valued by her colleagues. Known as Reliable Maggie at the office, she was the first person everyone consulted when problems arose. Her meticulousness and strong sense of responsibility hadn't changed since childhood. From elementary school, she always submitted homework on time and served as class representative and on various committees. Within her family, she was the dependable eldest daughter, always taking care of the house when her parents were away. In stark contrast was her sister Lisa. Working as a successful fashion designer in New York, Lisa was Margaret's polar opposite. Bright, sociable, and unafraid to stand out, Lisa had attracted attention with her fashion sense and beauty since her school days, and now her talent had brought her to the point of launching her own brand. Maggie, look. My design was featured in Vogue. The magazine pages Lisa sent last month prominently displayed a model wearing her vibrantly designed dress. Margaret sent heartfelt congratulations, but couldn't help feeling a moment of loneliness when comparing her own modest life. Their father Walter, a retired construction company executive, and their mother Eleanor, a former high school teacher, always boasted about Lisa. Family gatherings inevitably featured stories of Lisa's latest successes, and their parents' eyes would shine with pride at their daughter's glamorous achievements. Lisa has such remarkable talent, Eleanor would say. While the words for Margaret were always the predictable, Maggie is always so dependable. Behind that word dependable, always lurked the expectation that she would take care of household chores and look after her parents. Margaret sighed deeply as she looked at the travel bag on the kitchen counter. During this Christmas vacation at her parents' home, she was expected to handle numerous household chores and help with the year-end cleaning. This had been her natural role as a daughter for many years. Recently, Margaret had begun to feel strongly uncomfortable with this unequal relationship. Though she had grown accustomed to this role division since her student days, she increasingly yearned for time to live her own life. She wanted time for hobbies, time with friends, and most importantly, time for herself. Margaret held a small hope for her mother's words about a special surprise. Perhaps this year they would acknowledge not just Lisa but her as well. Maybe they would express gratitude in some way for her years of dedicated support. Margaret loaded the last of her luggage into the car and began driving toward Willow Creek. Watching the snowy landscape outside her window, she wished this Christmas would be something special. Christmas morning found the Watson family living room wrapped in the warmth of the fireplace and the scent of pine. Outside the window, snow fell quietly, creating a perfect white Christmas scene. Margaret, having already helped with extensive cleaning and meal preparation since arriving at her parents' house, felt tired, but her heart leaped at the special atmosphere of Christmas morning. Everyone, breakfast is ready. Eleanor's cheerful voice rang out from the kitchen, and Margaret, having just finished decorating the Christmas tree in the living room, headed to the kitchen. The table was laden with colorful fruits, bacon, eggs Benedict, and freshly baked croissants, while Eleanor poured orange juice into glasses. Maggie, thank you. The table setting is perfect, Eleanor said, but her gaze quickly turned to Lisa, who was coming down the stairs. Lisa, that sweater is lovely. Did you design it yourself? Yes, it's part of last month's collection, Lisa answered proudly, tossing her long blonde hair elegantly as she sat down at the table. Everyone, Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas to our famous designer. Walter looked up from his newspaper with a smile. Your name was in the news this morning, listed as one of the designers to watch this year. Margaret smiled quietly and took her seat. Good morning, everyone. Merry Christmas. During breakfast, conversation was dominated by stories of Lisa's recent successes, exhibitions in New York, collaborations with famous celebrities, interview requests from fashion magazines. Margaret nodded along, occasionally trying to share events from her accounting firm, but the topic quickly returned to Lisa. After breakfast, the family moved to the living room and gathered around the large Christmas tree decorated in front of the fireplace. Colorfully wrapped presents were piled on the floor. Now, time for presents, Walter announced loudly, putting on a Santa hat and sitting on the floor. First, for Lisa. Lisa squealed and clapped her hands as she received a long envelope from her father. "What is it? What is it?" Margaret watched with a gentle smile. Lisa opened the envelope, and upon seeing its contents, jumped up. "No way. 2 weeks at the Emindarili Resort in Bali? First-class tickets too?" Lisa stared at the documents in disbelief, then discovered the high-value travel checks inside. "I can't possibly use all this. You're the pride of our family." Eleanor embraced her daughter with a smile. "I'm so happy your talent and hard work are being recognized. We thought this gift was fitting to celebrate your success." Walter joined in, proudly puffing out his chest. "Your achievements this year have been truly remarkable." Lisa hugged her parents, then turned to Margaret and excitedly said, "I can't believe it. Such an extravagant present." Margaret nodded with a genuine smile. She truly felt happy for her sister's success. "Now it's Maggie's turn." Walter retrieved a medium-sized box from under the tree and handed it to Margaret. "This is something we prepared especially for you." Margaret's heart swelled with expectation. This might be the special surprise her mother had mentioned. The box was beautifully wrapped and decorated with an elegant ribbon. "Thank you." Margaret carefully untied the ribbon and cautiously opened the wrapping paper without tearing it. When she lifted the lid of the box, there was a single sheet of paper inside. Household chore list assigned to Margaret. Margaret doubted her eyes for a moment. The paper detailed an extensive list of household chores in small print. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. "Now you can be even more helpful," Walter said with a broad smile. "You've always been good at organizing things. While Lisa is traveling, we're planning to visit friends in Florida. It's such a relief to leave the house in your care." Lisa clapped her hands. "Maggie, thank you. I hope my room will be perfectly clean when I return from my trip." The air in the room seemed to freeze. Margaret slowly raised her face and saw her family's expectant expressions. They were serious. They genuinely thought this was a Christmas present for her. "Thank you, it's very practical," Margaret said quietly. To hide the slight tremor in her voice, she stood up. "I think I need some fresh air. I'll step outside for a bit." Margaret left the room with measured steps. But the moment she closed the door to her room upstairs, tears fell from her eyes. Staring at the accumulating snow outside the window, she took several deep breaths. Emotions she had suppressed for years came rushing in. She took a suitcase from the closet and began packing. Quickly filling it with necessary clothes and personal items, she took out a notepad. "To my family, thank you for the Christmas present. For a long time, I have fulfilled the expected role of the good daughter and reliable sister. But today, I've decided to live my own life. I don't think I'll be in touch for a while. Please don't worry about me, Margaret." She placed the note on her pillow, took her suitcase, and went downstairs. In the living room, her family was still exchanging presents, apparently not noticing her absence. Margaret silently left through the front door and loaded her luggage into the car. As she drove along the snow-covered roads, Margaret was overwhelmed by mixed feelings of liberation and anxiety she had never experienced before. She didn't know if this was the right choice. She only knew that she couldn't continue as before. As she left the town of Willow Creek, watching the lights of her family home grow smaller in the rearview mirror, Margaret had taken the first step toward her new life. From the window of a hotel in downtown Philadelphia, Margaret gazed at the snow-covered cityscape. For 3 hours since checking in, she had sat on the bed, contemplating the meaning of her actions. For the first time in her life, she had broken plans, turned her back on expectations, and acted honestly according to her own feelings. "So this is what freedom feels like," she murmured, turning on her smartphone. She opened her social media apps one by one, logging out of all accounts. Finally, she opened her messaging app and left only a brief vacation notice to her boss at work. She wrote the reason as family circumstances. She assured herself that wasn't a lie. The hotel room was small but clean and functional. Above all, it wasn't a space filled with someone else's expectations or demands. Margaret sighed deeply and took a small bottle of wine from the minibar. As if celebrating the first impulsive action of her life, she poured red wine into a glass. To new beginnings. That night, Margaret sent an email to just one person, her friend of 10 years, Sarah. It was a simple message. "I might be out of touch for a while. Don't worry, I need time to reassess my life." As Christmas night deepened, anxiety began to spread in the Watson household. I checked Maggie's room. Eleanor returned to the living room with a changed expression. Her luggage is gone, and this was on her pillow. She handed Margaret's note to her husband. Walter read it and frowned. What is she thinking? This joke has gone too far. Lisa took the note from her father's hand and read it. Maggie, I can't believe she would. Her voice was small and trembling, unlike her usual confident tone. I'll call her right away, Eleanor said, taking out her smartphone. But Margaret's phone didn't connect. It goes to voicemail. She's probably just walking around the neighborhood, Lisa said, but added uncertainly as she looked at the blizzard outside, she'll come back eventually. But Margaret didn't return. Morning came, and the day after Christmas, she was still gone. When Margaret greeted the third morning in her Philadelphia hotel, her smartphone was vibrating with impossible frequency. Calls and messages from her parents arrived without interruption. She took a deep breath and gathered the courage to open the messages. The first messages were simple expressions of concern. "Maggie, where are you? We're worried, please get in touch." Gradually, the tone of the messages changed. "You're a grown adult now. Stop this unreasonable behavior. Contact us immediately." And the latest messages began to include practical inquiries. "Maggie, the garage door won't move. How do I fix it? Who's going to manage the house? Who will clean Lisa's room?" Margaret laughed softly. It was an ironic laugh. There were more questions about household chores than words of concern for her well-being. That revealed her true value in her family. She didn't reply to the messages and set her smartphone to silent mode. She extended her stay at the hotel for another week and headed to a nearby cafe. Savoring the luxury of having her own time, she ordered a warm cafe latte. Meanwhile, confusion gradually deepened at the Watson home. Lisa departed for her luxurious Bali trip as scheduled. Before leaving, she hesitated a bit, but when her mother said, "It's a special gift, and Maggie would want you to go," she regained her smile and seemed reassured. "Don't worry about Maggie," Eleanor said in the car while driving Lisa to the airport. "She's always been responsible, so she'll come back eventually." However, after Lisa's departure, the house gradually fell into chaos. Walter and Eleanor could barely manage basic household chores. In their generation, gender roles were rigid. Walter considered housework women's work, and Eleanor, despite having worked as a teacher for years, had relied on Margaret for most household tasks. Laundry piled up, dishes remained unwashed, and garbage bins began to overflow. Moreover, they were at a loss about the bill payment system that Margaret usually managed. "This won't do," Eleanor said. "Should we cancel our Florida trip?" "Don't be ridiculous," Walter objected. "It's a promise to our friends. We can't suddenly cancel our annual gathering." "But what about the house? And the New Year's party?" At Eleanor's words, Walter looked up. The New Year's party, the big annual gathering of all relatives at the Watson home. Invitations had already been sent, and relatives from afar had already booked flights. And the preparation, cooking, and hosting had always been Margaret's responsibility. "Oh no," Walter muttered. "Without Maggie, we can't have the party." At that moment, the phone rang. When Eleanor answered, Lisa's excited voice came through. "Mom, Bali is amazing. The beaches are fantastic, and the hotel staff is so kind." While listening to Lisa, Eleanor's mind was preoccupied with worries about the party. "Lisa, have you heard from Maggie?" "No, I haven't. Isn't she back yet?" Lisa's voice sank a little. "No, not yet." And Eleanor searched for words. "I'm thinking about the New Year's party." "Oh," Lisa's voice showed understanding. "It'll be tough without Maggie." After hanging up, Eleanor and Walter tried calling Margaret's cell phone again. This time, instead of going to voicemail, it rang briefly before disconnecting. At least it indicated her phone was on. "I'll try sending another message," Eleanor said, and began typing. "Maggie, please get in touch, it's important." There was no reply. As the year's end approached, anxiety in the Watson home reached its peak. 3 days until the new year. Relatives would soon arrive. The house was a mess, and no preparations had been made. "We can't wait any longer," Walter decided. "We need to find Maggie." They contacted Margaret's workplace, but received only the reply that she was on vacation. They also contacted her friend Sarah, but Sarah only said they should respect Margaret's wishes. "I'll try calling her directly once more," Eleanor said. This time the phone rang, and suddenly Margaret's voice was heard. "Hello? Maggie?" Eleanor shouted. "Where are you? Come back." On the other end of the phone, Margaret took a quiet breath. She gazed out the window, listening to her inner voice. "It's about the party, isn't it?" she said calmly. "Yes, but not just that." Eleanor's voice was filled with urgency. "We're worried about the house, and about you too." "Really?" Margaret asked. "When I disappeared, wasn't your first concern not about me, but about the housework?" Silence flowed on the other end of the phone. "Maggie, please." This time it was Walter's voice. "Come back home. Nothing works without you." Margaret closed her eyes. Conflicting emotions swirled within her chest, between wanting to help her family and her new determination to value herself. "Let me think about it," she finally spoke. "I'll give you an answer tomorrow." After hanging up, Margaret lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. What should she do? While savoring the freedom to choose for herself for the first time, she began to think deeply. Philadelphia morning was quiet. Margaret sat by the hotel window, holding a warm coffee and gazing at the cityscape. During these few days, she had taken time to think deeply about her life. Days spent always trying to be the good daughter, putting her own wishes aside. She realized she had lost sight of herself in trying to meet others' expectations. For 38 years, I didn't know how to live for myself. Margaret opened her notebook and reread the thoughts she had jotted down over the past few days. The life she wanted, the values she cherished, and above all, how to respect herself. This was a new discovery for her. Yesterday she had a long conversation with Sarah Fisher, a psychological counselor she had met by chance at a cafe near the hotel. Sarah listened to her story with a warm smile, occasionally posing sharp questions. Setting boundaries is one way to cherish yourself. Sarah's words resonated. Sometimes, saying no is the most courageous form of self-affirmation. Margaret made her decision. She would return to her family but with conditions. She opened her laptop and began writing a letter to her parents. Dear Mom and Dad, for a long time, I have found joy in serving my family. However, the Christmas incident clearly showed how I am seen and valued within the family. I will return home. I will help prepare for the New Year's party. But from now on, I would like you to understand the following. I am not a maid. I wish to be treated equally as a daughter. Household chores should be shared by all family members. My time and effort have value, and I want that to be respected. My life choices and successes should be celebrated just as much as Lisa's. If these conditions are not acceptable, I will not return home and will follow my own path. I await your response. With love. She sent the email and took a deep breath. It was the first step toward her new self. The reply came quickly. Maggie, of course, please come back immediately. We accept any conditions. The house doesn't function well without you. With love. Margaret smiled wryly at its brevity and urgency. They still didn't seem to understand. But this was just the beginning. She started packing her belongings and preparing to check out. Standing at the doorway of her family home, Margaret was enveloped in a strange sensation. The door she had walked out of just a few days ago was the same, but she herself felt greatly changed. Taking a deep breath, she turned the doorknob. The living room was in the state she had imagined. Scattered newspapers, unwashed dishes piled on the coffee table, decorations fallen to the floor. The Christmas tree lights were off, and the pine needles had already turned brown. Maggie. Eleanor rushed from the kitchen and tried to embrace her daughter. But Margaret stepped back and looked straight at her parents. Mom, Dad, we need to talk. Her parents exchanged surprised glances at the tone of her voice. This wasn't the usual compliant Margaret. The three sat at the dining table, and Margaret began speaking calmly. The conditions I wrote in my email are not just negotiation materials. They are the new boundaries in my life. Maggie, we were just worried about you, Eleanor said apologetically. Really? Margaret quietly asked. The first messages were concerned, where are you? But they quickly changed to practical matters. Like, how do I manage the house, and who will clean Lisa's room? Eleanor was at a loss for words, and Walter intervened. Maggie, we just wait. Margaret raised her hand. Please listen to me first. For 38 years I've responded to family expectations as the reliable child. But behind that, my own life, my wishes, my successes were secondary. She took a deep breath and continued. The Christmas present was symbolic of that. For Lisa, a luxurious trip and praise. For me, a chore list and the words useful. Is that my worth? The words resonated heavily in the room. Eleanor and Walter wore confused expressions. They had never objectively viewed their actions. We didn't mean it that way, Eleanor said in a small voice. Intentions don't matter, Margaret said gently but firmly. What matters is how I felt as a result. And what we do from now on. What do you want? Walter asked with a serious expression for the first time. Equality, Margaret answered simply. Let's create a chore distribution chart. Let's all prepare together for the New Year's party when relatives come. And most importantly, respect and recognize the value of my life choices, just as you do Lisa's. Walter opened his mouth to speak but closed it again. After a silence, he let out a heavy sigh. What you're saying makes sense. Eleanor nodded slightly at his words. Maggie, maybe we've taken you for granted, I'm sorry. Margaret smiled softly for the first time. There's no need to apologize. What matters is what happens from now on. That afternoon, the three gathered in front of the kitchen whiteboard. Under Margaret's leadership, a chore distribution chart was created. Cleaning, cooking, shopping, garden maintenance, bill payments. All items were fairly distributed. When Lisa returns, we'll add her share too, Margaret said. At that comment, her parents hesitated momentarily but soon agreed. Honestly, I don't know how to do some of these chores, Walter admitted, a bit embarrassed. It's okay, Dad, Margaret said warmly. I'll teach you. Even if you're not skillful, there's value in trying. Eleanor was surprised by her daughter's change but began to feel hope for a new relationship. Maggie, you've always been strong. Eleanor took her daughter's hand. We just took it for granted. Preparing for the New Year's party became a new experience for the Watson family. Instead of giving instructions, Margaret worked together with the other two. Walter used a vacuum cleaner for the first time, and Eleanor challenged herself to prepare party dishes under Margaret's guidance. It's actually quite enjoyable once you try it, Walter said after finishing the living room decorations. I don't know why I avoided it for so long. Old habits are hard to change, Eleanor sighed. In our generation, role divisions were clear, but that doesn't mean they can't be changed, Margaret said. What's important is respecting each other and helping one another. The night before the party, there was a video call from Lisa. Her suntanned face from Bali appeared on the screen. Maggie, you're back, Lisa said brightly. I'm coming back the day after tomorrow. Will I make it in time for the party? You will, Margaret smiled. But when you get back, we need to talk. Is there a problem? Lisa frowned. Not a problem, Margaret said gently, a change. For the better. After the video call, Margaret returned to her room. For the first time since running away on Christmas, she would sleep here. But neither the room nor she herself was the same anymore. Looking up at the night sky outside the window, Margaret smiled slightly. It wasn't a complete solution. Years of unhealthy relationships couldn't be changed with a single confrontation. But this was the beginning of change. And above all, Margaret herself had changed, which was the biggest transformation. Knowing your own worth, she murmured. That's the beginning of everything. She took out her diary and began recording today's events and emotions, like recording the beginning of a new chapter. On an April afternoon, with spring sunlight embracing the town of Willow Creek, Margaret was preparing dinner in the kitchen of her own apartment. 4 months had passed since Christmas, and her life had changed significantly. While continuing her work at the accounting firm, she attended watercolor classes once a week, pursuing a hobby she had long admired. And the biggest change was renting her own apartment. Just a 20 walk from her parents' home. Living nearby to maintain relationships with her parents while securing her own space and time, that was the solution Margaret had chosen. Sunday evening dinners had become a new family tradition, and tonight was her turn to host at her apartment. The doorbell rang, and when Margaret opened it, her parents and Lisa were standing there. Something smells good, Eleanor smiled and presented a bouquet. The first tulips from the garden. Thank you, Mom. Margaret accepted the flowers and invited everyone in. Walter brought a bottle of wine, and Lisa carried a dessert box. Each bringing something. This was also part of the new tradition. How was your watercolor class this week? Lisa asked. Her attitude had also changed. After returning from Bali, Lisa had initially resisted the family's new policy, but with Margaret's firm attitude and her parents' consistent stance, she too had begun to adapt gradually. It was wonderful, Margaret replied, pointing to a small landscape painting hanging on the living room wall. This is my latest work. You've got talent, Walter said, looking surprised. Why didn't you start sooner? A moment of silence flowed at that question, but Eleanor gently nudged her husband's arm. That's something we should reflect on too. During the meal, conversation flowed naturally. Lisa talked about her latest fashion show, Walter reported on his golf progress in his retirement group gatherings, and Eleanor enthusiastically spoke about local volunteer activities. And Margaret discussed the possibility of a promotion at the accounting firm. Let's make a toast, Eleanor raised her glass. To our new beginnings. After the meal, Lisa invited Margaret to the balcony. The sisters stood side by side, gazing at the twilight sky. I want to apologize, Lisa finally spoke. For years, I took special treatment for granted and thought it was normal. I never considered your feelings. Margaret turned to her sister. Lisa's eyes reflected sincere regret. It's not your fault, Margaret answered quietly. It was a relationship we all created. What matters is what happens from now on. Will you come to my show in New York next month? Lisa asked. I'll arrange special seats, and, for the after party too. Margaret smiled. Her sister was inviting her into her world for the first time. Of course I'll go. I'm looking forward to it. In the living room, Walter and Eleanor were talking in low voices. They seemed to be getting along, Walter said. Yes, Eleanor smiled. The family counseling is helping. The monthly family counseling sessions, suggested by Margaret, had become opportunities to face years of unhealthy relationships and role divisions, sometimes facing painful truths, but it was gradually strengthening family bonds. When the sisters returned to the living room, Eleanor took out a calendar. Let's decide on the next big cleaning day. Lisa sighed softly but nodded honestly. Thursday next week works for me. Margaret smiled quietly. They hadn't become a perfect family. Sometimes they fall back into old behavior patterns. But she knew that what mattered was continuing to make an effort. As they were leaving the apartment, Eleanor hugged Margaret tightly. Thank you for your courage, she whispered in her daughter's ear. You saved our family. With those words in her heart, Margaret saw her family off at the door. The balance in her life was gradually being restored. Her relationship with her family, her work, and above all, the time and place to devote to herself. The decision on Christmas Day had led not only her but the entire family onto a new path. She returned to her apartment and gazed at her mother's tulips arranged by the window. Like flowers announcing the beginning of a new season, her life too had begun to bloom anew.